Hello and welcome to the Engerati studio at Charge 2016. I'm joined by May Shibata, Chief Executive Officer of Essence Partners. May, for the purpose of just setting the scene, could you tell us a bit about Essence Partners and what you do?
Yes, so Essence Partners, we're based in New York City, so we're focused on the US market primarily, but we're a strategic marketing firm just solely focused on the energy sector. So we do anything from market research, branding, marketing, to all of that implementation for energy clients.
Okay, well, it's interesting, right? Because the US is one of those prime examples of really embracing marketing on multiple levels, especially in, say, fast-moving consumer goods, brands like Nike. How would you compare marketing from that, that sort of perspective to, say, the power and utilities sector?
Yes.
What are the big trends or differences you're seeing?
Well, the energy sector traditionally has not done any marketing, and we can blame the fact that it used to be a monopoly for part of that. But in my opinion, there's really no excuse for it necessarily. So as a company, we actually did a campaign recently called the Ugly Flyer Contest. And so if you have an ugly piece of marketing material, send it to us and we'll fix it to you for free. And a funny thing happened. Everybody loved the idea. Everyone said we were going to get tons and tons of entries. But the reality of it is we only got few entries. And the reason, I think, is that people think that their marketing is great, it's everyone else's. It was a very interesting social experiment. So we're a little bit in our own bubble where we talk to ourselves a lot as a sector. And if you kind of take more of a outside-in view of the world, you realize that a lot of the points that we talk about as the energy sector is just not relevant to consumers. And I think that's the thing that needs to change, because then people will realize, oh, my communications piece doesn't work.
Okay, it's really interesting that you say that, because one of the points that's been, I wouldn't say bandied around, but keeps coming up in the first half of the show is that relation to, say, bigger and more mature brands. You know, Apple talking about people traveling. You've got people referring to the elections in the US. Is that something that, again, that the energy sector really needs to learn from? It's less about the product, more about the context and what people are actually doing right now in their lives.
Well, if we put it in the context of branding, which is what this conference is about, you've got two tiers of branding, right? So if you're thinking about corporate branding is the way you connect your business strategy with your customers. So it is much more holistic, right? Whereas if you think about product branding, then you realize that it's more about the story of the value proposition that the product offers that you need to convey. So if you're in the energy sector, so say you're a utility, there's two levels. There's the corporate branding, there's the what is the utility doing to help customers, and then there's what we've been talking about in this conference as the commodity, the electricity itself, which more falls more on the product side. So you can have two tiers of branding, and I think that holistically that makes it into a bigger picture, because it's not just about the product, right? It's then about what the utility does to help the customer experience through all of that.
Okay, I want to touch back on your ugly flyer experiment. I thought that was really interesting. So you had the few entries, and how much work did it take to then get them up to shape? What was the key outcome of that exercise?
Yes. So we have yet to deliver on our promise because the contest just closed. But I can tell you what was needed, or what will be needed. So for starters, it's about the right types of headlines, right? So what words do you use? What's the message? What's the tone of that message? It's being consistent across the board in terms of the logos, the colors, the choice of imagery. So it's kind of taking the existing brand as it is, taking the best elements of it and bringing it forward, and then hoping to build consistency upon that.
And this is on a B2C level?
As a company, we do both. We do both B2B as well as B2C. I can tell you that the flyers that we got were more B2C.
Okay, because it's quite interesting. I mean, from our perspective at Engerati, and we do a lot of B2B marketing, work with a lot of solution providers marketing into utilities, and it seems largely that they kind of get the concepts there. They're good at storytelling and showing the value, because it's more straightforward. I was curious to understand how that relates to the B2C side of things, because I don't really see I mean, I see a lot of ads in the UK
Yeah.
telling me about how important a smart meter will be or a thermostat, but none of them actually get what I'm really interested in right now, in my
Yeah.
perspective, which may not necessarily be the thermostat.
No, there's definitely a disconnect in the United States as well. Here's a funny experiment for you to do. If you Google smart thermostat and you click on the image search, you see lots of nests and things on the wall. You see some images of people almost reaching out to the nest. But you know what? That is not the value proposition of a smart thermostat, right? The value proposition of a smart thermostat is you can be on your phone outside seeing how warm it is in your apartment or cooling it down because you're going to come home. But none of those Google image ads show any of that. So just fundamentally, there's a disconnect between what, as a consumer, we need versus what the industry is putting out. So for sure, that disconnect exists here in the United States, everywhere.
Because that's the interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
Most other sectors you go to, for example, you can all talk about these things, but you're largely disconnected from the product. This is the one weird sector where myself and yourself both use electricity,
Yes.
and everyone in this room
Yes.
probably does. So you'd think that everyone would get how to talk to each other.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. I think the biggest thing that's missing in this sector is the inspiration behind how amazing it is, to have electricity. And the sector as a whole, because they've been focused on reliability and kind of keeping customers safe, they've sort of kept all of that in the background. And I'm going to give some U.S. specific stats. I'm sorry, I don't have the European ones. But if you talk about the U.S. grid, it's 99.97% reliable. It is, you've got 450,000 miles of transmission lines. You've got tons of smart meters. You've got all of this intelligence end to end, so that when you flip on the light switch, the light comes on, right?
Which is all I care about, really.
Yeah, exactly. But if people appreciated what it took for that moment, I think they would listen more, just fundamentally.
Okay. Well, that sort of brings us to sort of where we are right now.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting. You said, historically, a lot of these power companies have come from a monopolistic environment.
Yeah.
But obviously there's unbundling, deregulation, the entry of renewables at a residential level. So do you think sort of this whole need to embrace branding is a coming of age experience or an inevitability? And if so, really, how ready do you think the power and utility sector is to embrace that?
The sector is ready to do something. I don't think they know that branding is a key tool to enable that. And if I can take that one step further, in the United States at least, I don't know that they would necessarily know how to pay for that, right? Because if you make an infrastructure upgrade, they know how to get that paid for. They put it through their commission and they get it, rate-based. If they do energy efficiency programs, they know how to get that paid for because there's a mechanism, again. How do you get branding paid for? It's a good question, right? It's sort of a chicken and egg problem, right? They know they need to change. They know other competitors from outside the energy sector are coming in. They've got great branding. They've got great sense of customers. So they know they need to do something. Maybe branding is a tool. They don't know that, but some of them do. But then how do you get it paid for?
Okay, but it's funny you say that, because I think, well, they've got marketing people, right? They've got marketing managers, communications experts. Do these guys not have budgets, or?
They have.
Or
Again,
is this a bit bigger than that?
No, they definitely have like a communications budget, public affairs type of budget, right? So it is about making sure that the public is aware of what the utility does and making sure that the regulatory commissions are happy with what the utility is doing. Does that cover branding? It has never covered branding.
Oh, so these two things are not the same. Just saying, well, I'm here and the lights are on, or don't worry about the outage. You can contact me. That's not necessarily the branding you're talking about. That might have an effect on your brand, but that isn't a branding effort.
Exactly. Yes. So if you've never paid for something, it just becomes a new line item, right? And as you know, utilities are capped in how much money they can make and what they can spend their money on. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 problem.
Okay. So let's talk about reasons to actually spend some dollar on
Sure.
branding. And one of those opportunities, actually you touched on one, the smart thermostat thing, and that's smart energy efficiency, sustainability. You know, it's one of those big issues, COP21 or down to a local, you know, reduce your energy usage because your bill will probably be lower. How does this fit into the branding opportunity? Is that potentially, you know, could that be a windfall for marketing managers, communications experts, or could it also potentially be a problem as well? Because, you know, that's more exposure, right?
Yes, and definitely as a conservative sector, I feel like utilities have said we don't want to overly extend ourselves. We don't want to, you know, stick our necks out, if you will, because, you know, overexposure can be an issue. But when every other sector is upping the hurdle on customer experience and the brand around that holistically, you know, multi-channel, then I think there's bigger harm in not doing anything, because then you're not controlling your brand. You're not controlling how the customer sees you. You're letting everybody else do that. And why would everybody else have an interest in protecting your interests? They don't, right? So I think you have to take a much more proactive approach in this day and age to manage your brand.
Gosh, I think that's probably the best place to end this this interview. Food for thought. Don't let someone else tell your story. Tell your story yourself. Thank you very much, Mai.
Of course, thank you.
And
Thanks
enjoy
for
the
having
rest
me.
of the show as well. To you, the audience, please, thank you very much for listening to this interview. If you'd like to hear more about energy branding, storytelling, and obviously telling your own story, check out the other interviews on your page. Feel free to check out our page for wider stories on the smart grid and renewables context as well. Thank you.